Hey everyone, Jess McCarthy here with MontessoriEducation.com. I recently had a conversation with a few dads of some children who attend the little Montessori schoolhouse my wife and I run, and I recorded the conversation with their approval. Of course, they were down for it. And here's a quick clip, and then we'll hop back in after.
I think Montessori in general is just develop, I guess, complexity in Kennedy's cognitive ability. It's like things she talks about are at different levels than what I expect her to, because she's like, Daddy, what is that? And I go, that's a stop sign. And she goes, No, that's a red octagon. And I'm like, that is the right answer. That is the right answer, you know? And
You're not wrong.
it, right. And it's a whole different level. Like she's 3, that's a stop sign.
Yeah, it's
No, that's a
crazy.
that's a red octagon. I have to constantly feel like I need to push her and tell her the truth and explain it all because she gets it. She understands different levels of things. And I think she's developed that from Montessori and just making connections, constant connections to things in different ways. And I'm so impressed by it every single day.
So the dad you heard speaking is Pat. He has 2 children with his wife, so a 3-year-old Kennedy and then an infant at home. The other dad is Tony, and he also has a 3-year-old daughter here named Amaya, and he and his wife Alyssa have a child at home too. Oh yeah, and Pat's wife's name is Ashley. And then there's Trishul, whose daughter actually just graduated. She finished her kindergarten year here. She's going to be attending a nearby Montessori elementary school, but Trishul has his wife Shahira, and they've been with us for a while. Good times there. We have a tight knit community. So what's really cool about the conversation you're going to hear is we talk about it all. We're kind of openly, raw at times. So you'll hear the ups and downs from some of these dads. Losing control sometimes, emotions. Whether you're dad or mom, you probably know about that. And then also just some relationship stuff, just with our spouses. So that's interesting as well. So it's gonna be fun. Quick note for those of you who parents and teachers out there that are longtime listeners, apologies for the kind of delayed summer. A lot of fun, great summer. School's back in session now. It's just been busy. So I'm getting back into it. Happy you're here, and I'm happy I'm back. So here comes the conversation. See you later. It might be good to start out with a bad moment. Like, what was a dad experience of yours that was bad? And you're like, oh man, this was a mess, or, felt guilty, you felt whatever. Anything stick out in your mind as bad? This was not fun for me, and that you learned from. So it's not like it's just stayed with you and just sucks. You haven't learned anything from it.
I remember there was a moment where Amaya, we were trying to get her to shower and she was playing with her toy. And I forget what it was, but I took the toy, put it away, and I brought her to the bathroom. I was super frustrated with her. And I remember Alyssa pulled me aside and she was like, How would you like it if you were in the middle of texting someone? I took your phone away and then brought you to another room. And I was like, Why would you do that? And she's like, Well, that's what you just did to Amaya. She doesn't understand what's going on. And that moment, it like hit me. I mean, semi guilty, right? Like, I get it. She doesn't understand, and I don't understand what's going on either, being a new parent. But that's probably one of the moments that I felt really bad, right? Because I just didn't get it. I wanted her to listen to me, and there's a difference between obedience and respect and all these other things we're learning about. And in that moment, I fell back to a primal instinct, like, "You're not listening to me. Take the toy away, put it down, drag her to the bathroom." As she's crying and screaming, and instead of truly listening to her and just taking a moment and taking a deep breath, like maybe she's just finishing something and I can ask her that. And once she's finished, I can take her to the bathroom. But in that moment, I was just so upset and angry. I was like, I'm not going to wait. I'm not dealing with this right now. And that happens from time to time still because she doesn't put her seatbelt on when we get in the car. She likes to run around the car, all these other things. And now it's like taking that moment of just deep breath, like, hey, it's okay. Let her finish what she's doing uh, and try not to be as much in a rush.
Yeah, and that can and
I
that can
think
happen at any age, right? I mean, because I think Amaya's 3, and how old was she at this
Mm-hmm.
point?
Probably two.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it can. I mean,
A
it
year
goes
and a
up to
half
like
too. Yeah.
40. You can have a kid at 40 and still have these things. So yeah, you guys resonate with that? Is that something that's never happened, or?
no, I resonate quite a bit with that.
I thought you were about to say no, it's never happened. I'm like, well,
No.
congrats, I gotta go, guys.
No, I think the bad, a general theme is reaction, right? We're human. we still have animalistic instincts. So the fight or flight, the immediate reaction to things is sometimes detrimental. And I think one anecdote that comes to mind is one time I was trying to dual purpose managing Kennedy in the restroom and doing something in the kitchen. So I was like guiding her through washing her hands. And I walked away to tend to something on the stove and I hear water splashing and I know it's the floor. And she has grabbed a cup, she has started to fill the cup and just decided to intentionally dump it on the floor. And I reacted poorly. And she was taken aback by it and immediately said, "Daddy, you're scaring me." And that was a huge gut punch to me.
Wow.
Because in that moment, she didn't feel like she felt scared, and I was the only one around, so I would assume she did not feel super safe in that moment. I was glad she felt comfortable enough to tell me that she was scared.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was pretty heavy, and in that moment, I really had to think about how I would handle it in the future. And to Tony's point of finding that pause and creating that moment to think about what's going on instead of just reacting, because the reaction is normally poor and it sets the wrong tone. And I do believe that my interactions with my daughter, Kennedy, the results or the outcome is normally dictated by the first few seconds of the interaction.
Mhm.
And I set the tone for that, right? So if I react poorly, she flies off the handle, gets scared, cries, doesn't want to do what I ask her to do, whatever. But if I take that moment, think about it, and give her what she needs, then things tend to go well.
You guys, I'm curious about this because it's like we know not to do certain things, right? Like we sit back and go, "Oh yeah, we shouldn't do this," but there's these moments when it's like it's almost primal, where it just comes out. Have you been able to kind of minimize the times it happens or lessen the number of times it happens through this process? And is it kind of not just in the moment, but it's doing that work of stepping back and thinking through? Like, how have you worked your way out of it? And then Trish, of course, if this resonates with you, maybe share a story and then, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. So I think a big part of it is it's a learning process. For many of us, it's a first time dealing with a small human. And the thing that I vividly remember is the very first day that my daughter was born, where the nurse brought her into the room to be with us and actually spend time, with my wife and I right after the birth. And nothing really prepares you for the moment when the baby just starts crying uncontrollably and you just feel hopeless. Like you try the basic things. You maybe even I know we read about things and we went through some of the training at the hospital, but when you're in the moment and now you have this responsibility and you need to make decisions that are impacting your child. I think Pat brings on something quite important. They do read off the emotion that you're putting out because that's, their first form of communication, that they're innately driven to sense the emotion of parents and build on it from there. And I'm pretty sure for many of the first occurrences, my daughter probably sensed fear, like, why is this adult, having a deer in the headlights face or kind of being frantic. And just not being able to calm her down for the first period, and this went on for at least the first few weeks. Like we just, well, me personally, I didn't feel equipped to know what was going on, even though
Mhm.
they give you the checklist, go through diaper, feeding, are they wet and hungry or need to be burped or tired, right? You go through that list. But even then, there were cases where, oh boy, she's just not calming down no matter what we're trying. And it took this insight that actually came from a nurse at our first prenatal checkup. And something that she told us really stood out to me. And the feedback was, our job as parents isn't always to stop the crying, it's to love the child through the crying, meaning It doesn't have to be about making them stop immediately. It's about realizing that they're going through something that's uncomfortable, that they haven't experienced before, and just being there with them and supporting them through it can make a lot of difference. And I've kind of carried that point, that knowledge or that insight well into the future, even to this day. But again, nothing prepared me for having to really cope with it on day one.
So what I'm curious, what you're saying, connect with everything else, is that like as an animal or as our basic things, we just go on what we learned ourselves or what we grew up with. And then when you have kids, it's like, oh, you're just expected to just do your thing with the kid. It's like, as you said, Trish, like, how would I know? I mean, me, I've been doing this for 20 years. So I have some knowledge, but like, if you have no or relatively little experience with a child, then none of us had experience with our own children. So how would we know? So I just think of it as an iterative process. So in terms of the practicality of getting, quote, better at being a dad or being a parent, you know, you got some insight early on, Trishul, Tony, Pat, like with the stories you told, what's been effective in kind of guarding against that just gut reaction?
Sure. I honestly, it's been two timely books that my wife and I have been reading. One is Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish, and the other is Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. And Clear Thinking is all about decision making and thinking through problems as a human and a business professional. And what I've learned from that book is that we are susceptible to our defaults because of our ego or social defaults or whatever it may be. So that book has given me some tools to try to create that pause that I spoke about earlier. Think about, you know, what my child is trying to do, and then make the best decision based off the information that I've gathered in those brief moments. With Good Inside and Dr. Becky Kennedy, the main point that resonated with me is what she calls MGI, or the most generous interpretation. So we should always take the most generous interpretation of what our child is doing and never assume that there is malintent or they're doing something nefarious or whatever it may be. So if I am thinking about those two things, I seem to handle the situation appropriately, and I can, you know, be there for her and do my job as a parent to kind of be the guardrails of her emotions right now, and her actions, and just let her be safe in her space and, you know, grow and develop emotionally
I
with me
wonder
by
that
her side, you know.
the most generous intent is kind of like, I don't know if you guys know Haim Gnop, but this idea of treat your child like a visitor. So like somebody who's
Mhm.
coming over, your guest at your house. It's so crazy how different,
Yeah.
particularly like older, once you get into older children, it's like, get your room clean. Like it's just these reactions that are bizarre given like if a guest was there, there's no way you'd be talking to him like that. I think it's similar to that MGI point, Matt. So um, Tony, what about you?
I'm currently taking notes of
There
treat
you go.
your child like a guest slash visitor. So every year, and this only 2 years in a row. So talk about consistency. I have this notes page on my iPhone that it's like 2023 notes and then 2024 notes. It's just things that I've read and found useful or things that I want to like just keep track of. So I want to write that down because that's such a great way to think about it. Because to be honest, I don't know what I found. I think just I've been lucky enough to have Alyssa that will call me out from time to time, and then just really just taking a break and trying to see it from someone else's point of view, which is easier said than done because something I work on with people I work with is like, hey, it's called the backseat driver. So someone who has food challenges, they may think that, or emotional eating, I call it the backseat driver, which is they're driving the car, I'm the person next to them, and then they have someone in the backseat who I can't see or hear. It's only them, and we're driving down this road since we're all here in Florida and we're driving to New York. That backseat driver is saying, hey, pull over, hey, pull over. Eventually gets like on a megaphone, it's like, hey, pull over. And the person pulls over, but I can't hear them. Right. And that's the reaction of the person versus being the navigator in that car. Right. Like I'm just giving the directions to that person. So in that situation, it's like I'm just trying to give directions to Amaya, and there's some sort of backseat driver that's talking to her and vice versa. she's just trying to give me direction that she's doing something, and I have a backseat driver saying, no, you got to put her in the shower now because now you're not going to go to sleep on time. Then you're not going to be able to go to the gym in the morning. Then you're going to be super upset. Then your whole day's ruined and you still have to work and all these other things are going to be happening. So it's this backseat driver that she's never going to see that's always in my head. And that's something I work on with the people that I work with. And I try to apply it to myself as best possible, which is just trying to name that driver so I humanize it. So I know that it's someone versus just letting it be this phantom thought in my head. And then taking that and having a little bit of control over it. Right. So naming that emotion, I think, is something that's been helpful, even though I don't have like a true guided plan. I have noticed that since having that call out and Melissa continually call me out on things of that nature helps me take that deep breath and take a step back and think of it from a different perspective. And I think one of the most recent ones, she went to school wearing an Elsa dress. And for me, I was like, what? How could she be leaving the house wearing an Elsa dress? She's going to school. I want her to look well and not cause distraction. And this is like, who cares? Like, who is this really affecting? And I was like, well, what if it affects other people? She's like, Amaya's happy. Wearing an Elsa dress is not going to change anyone's attitude or anything about her. It's just clothing. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Because even my mom was there and she was making comments about her wearing an Elsa dress to school. But it's like the world's smallest thing that no one cares about and no one even notices. And she's just going to be happy. It's like, why fight her over changing her clothes when it's just going to school? And in my head, I'm like, well, I know it's going to be itchy. She's going to want to take it off. I don't know if she has a change of clothes. And sometimes you just have to let her go down that path. So to answer your question, I think it's just having someone that helps, that can call you out. So having a good partner, which can be difficult, especially now with so many people that are single parents. But having someone that can help call you out, and if not, having a almost self-regulation or that self-control of a way to make yourself aware.
So do you guys, this might be a personal question, but it's, we're married. So we have another human being that we're with. And no matter how great the relationship, you're dealing with two different people. So how has that been? Have you found that it's tough because, you have your ways? I mean, it almost sounds like, Tony, it sounds almost beautiful. You're like, oh, Alyssa, this is great insight. And that, in the moment, is that still like, there's a backseat driver, like, what is she talking about? Like,
Absolutely.
Okay. So that, because a lot of this is really dealing with our own stuff. It's not even about the kid. So I don't know. Have you guys recognized that element of it, of having children?
Yeah, I would say certainly. It's one of those things where you get one time through and you're always learning along the way. And boy, you could use that knowledge that you learned at age 3, when the daughter was first born.
Yes.
But you don't get it till age 3, and now your time is up. At least if that's your only child, which it is in our case. So it's always a learning process. And the tricky part is you have a sample size of 1. and that one sample is a different person every day. Like, they evolve so quickly that the problem you're trying to solve today might not be for the human that you're going to use it on tomorrow. So it does have to end up being just a constant kind of chasing the next thing, but being proactive, but not being too proactive. It's always about a balance of many competing concerns. And I think that also goes back to, at some point, you just have to try your best, realizing there are going to be mistakes. Like, things aren't going to go as well as you would like. But often, if that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do with imperfect information, knowledge, and understanding.
You guys, do you think of, I mean, you and Sheer just seem like so supportive of each other. Do you feel that you're on the same page? Were you always on the same page? Was there, because a lot of parents are going to be listening to this. There's just a lot of the battles, often it's moms who are the ones finding Montessori schools or finding care. Often it's moms that are pushing more of a kind of a freedom within limits approach versus like, you got to do this. So did you find that you're on the same page with Shahira, Trishul? And then, if you guys want to jump on the other ones, or did you have conflict along the way?
Yeah, well, there's so many things that it takes to raise a child. So I think it's impossible to agree on everything. One of the big struggles early on was the nighttime training, and coming up with some sort of consistent sleep pattern and getting it to a point where she was sleeping through the night. And we did have different opinions because my wife came from an understanding of, if Rhea is crying, she wanted to go immediately to her. And I was like, give her some time to calm down. And that was tricky. It's hard for a mother in general, right, to hear a baby crying and not immediately respond to it. And that, there's a maternal instinct where if that noise comes out, attention, jolts in that direction. And the tricky part is we did kind of notice with practice that my daughter could calm herself down if she was given more of the opportunity. But if we went to her too quickly, she just kind of got more riled up out of everything, because then she would kind of outsource her inability to calm down to somebody else who couldn't really fully understand what's going on, especially in the middle of the night. So that it was an early struggle. And we tried many things. We ended up landing on another resource for nighttime sleep training, where it involves a little bit of waiting and a little bit of window before the going to. And it was also one of those things where it ended up working, but then the child always evolves or things get messed up. Like you have a late night out or a weekend at grandma's, and then everything resets, or teething. So it certainly wasn't a thing where we found a solution, we worked, and life was all green and rosy from that point on. Just because there's just too many parameters involved in just the child's development when you try to layer in something with a structured regimen to train a child to sleep through the night.
Yeah, and so, I mean, sleep is like classic challenge, no matter who you are. But instead of trying to find out what is the answer to sleep right now, because that'd be a whole nother episode, so forth.
Yeah.
Do you, like Tony and Pat, are there any instances like Trishul's raising sleep, and that's a pretty normal conflict generally between men and women, or husbands and wife, but it can be different in different cases. But generally, was there anything else that stuck out like that you guys had conflict with the significant other?
So I think any conflict that has come between Ashley and I, and I'd say we're always on the same page. It's just never at the same time. She is always chapters ahead of me. So any conflict is where I have not yet learned how to handle that situation appropriately. And there is a look I get that I know that I'm not doing it appropriately. And I think Ashley and I just have an understanding of my wife that she is going to give it maximum effort in terms of gathering information and finding the right course of action and path for how to handle things. So when she comes to me and says, "Hey, you're doing this wrong, and here's why," I tend to just default to believe her and not really push back.
Wow.
I just tend to use it as like a point of education. There are times when I'm just mad and I don't want to hear it, and in that moment, my backseat driver is mouthing off to my wife. But later, we will revisit, and I will be like, "Okay, I see your point. This is where I was. I escalated or whatever, but you're right. I should probably handle that way." And I come around, but she inhales information, and she wants to do right by our children. So she is going to find the right path. So I tend to just trust her. And we were lucky. We actually had a person in our life who dated my father-in-law for a while. She was a principal at a Montessori school. And I asked what it was. And as you know, in my mid-20s, I was like, well, it doesn't sound like you really learn anything, because there was no talk about traditional education. So she schooled me pretty quickly on what it was. So Ashley and I have always kind of had that in the back of our mind. So when it came time for where Kennedy was going to go to school, we knew that it was probably going to be Montessori, and we were in agreement on that from day one.
That's cool. So I got to, before we go into how amazing Montessori is and this wonderful thing, I'm curious, Pat, because it sounds so beautiful, and I could see Ashley just being so insightful in so many ways. Are you telling me there's never been a moment where Ashley said something you're like, you know what? I'm not even angry. I just don't think that's true. Is there anything that jumps out?
Oh boy, this is recorded, Pat. You better watch your words.
No, I mean, I'm going to be honest. She comes with sources, right? She comes armed with information, and I just have nothing to come back with except like being a
Ah,
smart ass, like, you know what I mean? Like,
wow, that's
so I have
awesome.
nothing. So I just, okay, babe. And then she gives me her sources. It's normally from a doctor, a child development expert. And I read it and or see it. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna change how I do things.
All right. So you're not a pushover. You want some evidence, though. You want to see some,
Oh, I need if there I believe in the physical world around us and science and math and if there is some science-backed evidence on that, I will probably trust it every time.
cool.
There's power in
Awesome.
data, yeah. Yep.
Nice. Tony, is that your same experience? Like just Alyssa's got
This is being recorded, so I will only say.
yeah, let's not put you on the spot, Tony. Let's get to a different subject. Yeah.
Seasons, man. That's what I can tell you, at least in our relationship. There are seasons of our relationship where we're crushing it as parents, we're crushing it as a couple. I feel like we're doing great. Then there's other seasons where it's just like we are so out of tune. We don't even know what's going on with each other and what we're doing. That's just
Yeah.
me personally, where I mean, it's happened more recently. As you guys know, I was in the hospital for a month and it was just go time where it's just like I was telling her, you need to be with our son because she was breastfeeding and I need to be in the hospital. I wasn't working, she wasn't working, just a lot going on at that time emotionally for us. So I didn't even listen to the backseat driver, just like, how do we get our kid better?
Survival.
Right?
Yeah.
Survival mode.
Survival
That's
mode.
absolutely it. And even trying to get through sleep with the kids and all these other things that came with all of that. So I would say it's just the seasons where we talk with each other, we allow it to happen and discuss. And one big factor that plays a role in our lives is that we live with my mom, and that's her mother-in-law, and it's just such a different culture. Coming that I come from a Hispanic background, she comes from an American background. One big thing we just spoke about recently, I go in my mom's room, the kids go in my mom's room. And in my culture, it's like, it doesn't matter, just go in and out. Who cares, like, what's going on in the parents' room? In her culture, that how she was brought up was like never going in the parents' room. So we have talks about that where because of the different cultures, I mean, another sticking point was Christmas. Oh, we're going to Christmas and you're going to say Santa came 20 times in the Dominican Republic? I'm like, who cares? She's like, no, it has to be on Christmas Day and all these things. So sometimes it's so small as like Christmas Day, and other times
Yeah.
it could be just how is your grandparents treating Amaya? How is your parents treating Amaya and little
Yeah.
Tony, and how they treat them differently, all those things. So I would say we try to meet each other halfway and understand what's going on, and also bring our concept of where we're coming from and what that background is. And one thing we've been trying to do better at is being clear. And what that means is try to be short and concise with what the point is and not try to beat around the bush. Just really be
Yeah.
like, here's what we want, here's how we want to do it. Why do we want to do it this way? Think about it and let's talk about it. And one thing we've decided is towards the end of the day, we do not make decisions on anything because we're just so burnt
Yeah.
out. We have decision fatigue. We even had a conversation last night or the night before, like we're in bed, and it was just like she got emotional. She's like, let's just do this tomorrow. And I wasn't emotional at all about it. I don't even remember what it was, but it struck a chord with her. And it was like, let's talk about tomorrow. So knowing where our limits, boundaries are when we're having conversations, whether it's about the kids, each other, or anything, I think it's important to remind ourselves, even though in the moment, like we just want to get it done, we just want to finish it. So again, I think it's like seasons, understanding each other and clarity. There's just so much that goes into it that I can't give a direct answer of like, we know everything, we know how to
Oh,
do it,
that's
we know how to
great.
react. This is the consistency. This is just for us personally, it's like the seasons, because sometimes we're doing really great. This last month, I was traveling for work. I got sick. We traveled. She had to travel, and it was just a whirlwind of just be a parent. See you later. I don't have
Yeah.
time to do the transition. You got to do your best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't want to just put everyone on the spot. I'm thinking of just relationships. Again, that's the nature of relationships, to have conflict at times. That's such a good little note. Why are we having like big, serious conversations in bed at the end of like, we just went through a whole day of, so I like that. That's cool.
I can add to that.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that many founders of major tech companies refuse to make decisions after a certain point in time in the day because of decision fatigue. And it's the reason why Mark Zuckerberg wears the same thing every day, and why those guys just cut out so much of the monotonous decision making so they can focus on real problems.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that. When you are burnt out and your mind is racing from everything, you need to reset so you can think clearly about things.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things, given that we're, parents and talking about kids, is that if we're attempting to do this well, we can introspect and we can kind of look in, what am I thinking about this? And in terms of relationship elements, we can say something like, hey, what do you think I just said? Or let's chat about, so we can understand one another, instead of going off at the other person like, oh, I don't agree with you. It's like, well, what did I just say? Not in a mean way, but let's repeat, you almost repeat back, what you think. But with children, particularly children like 5 and under, they don't fully understand. At least Trishul, she's getting there. Like Rheya is at the point where she almost could probably describe to you what's going on inside, but it's still children at a certain age. They don't know. Like you ask them the why questions, and there's something behind it that they might not know. So how have you, particularly if you're kind of like the rational type, you want to understand, why did you do that? How have you dealt with the fact that they might not have an answer, they just did it? Like, how have you dealt with that as parents?
I think a part of it is early on, the child has these emotions, but they can't express it. Like they feel anger, fear, frustration, nervousness, and all of that, but the communication between that and the actual words is lacking. And part of what we've done early on is we've focused on feelings to a large degree, expressing them. Even, when we're communicating, between my wife and I, the child does pick it up. I'm feeling nervous today, or I'm feeling frustrated today. And we have these types of discussions, with my daughter, like, how did that make you feel? Did that make you feel this way or that way? Very early on, I remember one of the earlier material books that we bought for her was just a flip book with different smiley faces, but with different emotions on each. And just having her understand there's all these different feelings and they're okay, right? They're all okay to have at different time periods. It's not something meant to be denied, but it's meant to be validated. So, we understand you're feeling frustrated. Are you frustrated? Or, what's going through your body emotionally? Does it feel, jumpy, things like that? And we've been able to do that pretty young with Rhea, even though it might be kind of off base, her responses, it's just grown over time with practice to the point where it does feel like she has a more grounded understanding of the internal emotions that are going on inside of her.
So you were almost aware, obviously, that she's feeling something, but obviously she can't put it into words. So why not aid her in understanding what she's feeling, or giving a name to it at the least from an early age?
Yeah, and hoping that skill mature over time and nurturing it,
Yeah.
even if it's early on and it just may not even make sense for like a 2-year-old, but it's still a worthwhile exercise just for the
Yeah.
sake of doing it.
Pat, Tony,
I would
anything come to
say
mind?
what comes to me is that what we've been teaching Amaya is something that we've been working on personally. And it's just, if you're going through an emotion, take a deep breath. And the reason I can state that it's been working with Amaya, or at least I feel like it is because when Alyssa or myself get emotional, Amaya tells us, take a deep breath. Uh, like she calls us out on the things we're teaching her. So I thoroughly enjoy that, because that means she's knowing her emotions and she's understanding our emotions. And she can tell when we're getting emotional. And she's like, Papa, take a deep breath. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, you're right. Let me just take a deep breath and see what's going on. So that even goes back to that first question you're asking, like how we're dealing with all this. It's just like sometimes the things that we're preaching, is it actually being practiced by ourselves? Or, I mean, something similar, I guess, talking about what you're saying, like we're just trying to fix, or what we learned from our past, that's how we do it. So for me, it's just that understanding emotions has just been her reflecting it upon us.
Yeah.
I think for Ashley and I, we've agreed that in those moments, it's our job to kind of be more of a warm blanket to her and just be security and let her emote, let her have her feelings, let her work through it and just be there to let her know that she's safe, and loved, and everything's going to be fine, and let her calm down. And then we go back, and later when she's calm, we revisit it, and that's when we poke and prod, and try to figure out how she was feeling, or what triggered the event, or what may be going on. And she seems to be more open to discussing it at that point, and can think a little clearly, but knowing that she's not going to open up every single time, and we've accepted that we're not going to get a good answer every time. And when that happens, we find ourselves kind of leading her, and Ashley and I both tend to call each other out to not try to lead her, because Kennedy will just say yes, like, are you mad because of this?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, stop leading her, let her answer, and let's not take her auto yeses as truth.
Yeah. And I asked that to you because I'm assuming, I know kind of all three of you, we've gotten to know each other, and we're all somewhat analytical, like we're trying to figure things out, that type of individual. And when I work with older kids, 4th through 8th grade, we had those conversations. We're having dialogues about, like, well, what happened here? And let's go through it. And I brought that down. I was pushing it down when I went to the younger kids, because I thought, oh, well, and then, we could just figure this out. And, the old, I'm going to solve this problem kind of thing. And with that younger than 5, it tends to be that a lot of times they don't know. But I like what you guys are doing. You're hitting on the emotional element, where it doesn't matter if they don't know, you can see it. If a child's bawling, you can see that if they're sad or they're hurt. We don't need to dig deeper into that, and we can aid them in naming it or understanding it. So I like what you guys are raising. To maybe switch over to Montessori itself. I know you guys have a very specific experience because it's with La Casa, our Montessori schoolhouse, but trying to broaden out to Montessori, how has that been with you? Like, has there been anything new or different, or even if it's an anecdote, whatever, that's jumped out that, oh man, this Montessori is different, and it's been helpful, it's been weird, it's been whatever comes to mind with Montessori in your experience?
I
Just go for it.
Go ahead. No, please go.
I was gonna say, Jesse, I remember, I don't think you shared this at La Casa, but maybe you did. I feel like it was even in a previous life in another school. But there was a video of a baby reaching for a toy.
Oh yeah,
And
Ruby
yeah,
reaches for a toy,
really,
the 6-month-old.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Ruby, the 6-month-old, she's lying on a mat, and there's a toy right in front of her, and she was just struggling to get it. It was just within her grasp, right? And she just does this for minutes at a time. And then, of course, the innate urge for a parent is to push it closer or just hand it to her, right? And the kind of moral of the story is Ruby wasn't really looking for help. She was exploring her environment and reaching for it on her own. And it looked like she was struggling, but it didn't look like she was unhappy about it. If you, just observe her going through the motions, meaning, just because there's struggle doesn't mean it's bad, right? It just because there's suffering and some sort of strife, it doesn't mean you immediately have to jump in. And I think that was something that kind of clicked in my mind that I really didn't internalize up until that point. And now it makes complete sense to me, as it evolved over the years. The notion that I'm probably going to butcher this, but I think it's like a quote from Maria Montessori. Don't help a child with something that they feel they can do on their own, right? That they can. You probably know it better.
Never help a child with a task that they feel that they can succeed.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting quote because I can't find the exact source, but it's very good. So
I
Take
think
credit
it
for it.
I said it. It was mine.
Yeah.
Jesse, when you first said this to us, it blew my mind. But yes, I think it does sum it up very clearly, because kids are very capable, but we just have this urge to want to jump in. And often it's the standing back that leads to the most development, the not helping that leads to the most growth.
Yeah, and even that standing back, it's helping. There's another quote that The child is working as if I didn't exist. Like that's when interesting. It's so weird as a parent. It's kind of weird because you want to be like, oh, I want one-on-one. I want the teacher always active teaching them. You know, at least that was me when I first came into teaching.
Yeah.
And Montessori was like, you can be proudest of all as a teacher or as a parent. The child is working as if I didn't exist. That's, but it's tough because that's like that feeling like, oh, I'm not a part of this, you know? But Trisha, you said you set the environment. So in a way you are aiding, but you're not on top of the child saying you got to do this or that, you know? So.
It's interesting because it really made me think about what is the goal of myself as a parent to my daughter? Like, what do I want her to become and achieve in her life? And I think if I really, now that I've really thought about it, it's for her to be independent. If she can be an independent human and be able to control her own emotions and her own destiny and plan her own future, well, then my job is done, meaning my job as a parent is to make myself obsolete and let her take over and be her own individual.
You guys agree with Trisha? Or you want to push back and be like, Trisha, that's horrible.
No,
I
I
definitely
mean,
love my yeah. Go, Pat.
I mean, Montessori is right. It's about independence, and the whole goal of raising a child is creating a functioning adult, and Montessori seems to be the foundation of that. And we're seeing that every day with Kennedy because she was a COVID baby and she did not have a whole lot of interaction for a long time. And we saw it. She started speaking a little late, and we were just kind of concerned with her ability to socially interact with others. And once joining La Casa and Montessori and developing that independence, she has just taken off. And you've the anecdote you gave in a previous podcast episode about her and the plant that just blew me and my wife away. And she does stuff like that at home, and she will just go and play and use the restroom on her own and do things on her own, and it's awesome to see. And it's all because of the method.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those that, I don't know if you guys heard that episode, but just Kennedy, she came one day and we had gotten a plant over the weekend, and she just went over there and started, taking care of it, putting water in. Nobody said, "Oh, take care of that plant," but she just did it. And I think that's a part. I mean, Alessandra, my wife, is amazing, but it's part of this environment that's been created where they can be independent. And Pat, it's wild you saying, because even this is such a good example of like our parent fears. Like you had this feel like, oh, she talked late. And what's wild is just for everybody listening, and you guys, like Kennedy, I was just talking to her yesterday, and Alessandra's like, talk to her about some countries in Europe. So I went out there and sat with the map of Europe, and you've got the little puzzle pieces. I was like, oh, and what is this one? And she's like, oh, that's such and such. And she's like, this one is Denmark. And then I was asking Alessandra later, I was like, so has she gone through this map yet? And she's like, man, I only did it once. And so she's got all these names down. But as parents, and I want to emphasize this, I know people listening, we get fear because they're all like, here's what you're supposed to hit this standard by 2.2 years old. And it's just so much of it is just bogus. It's nonsense. It's ignorance. Now, of course, there are certain things where you want to be on the lookout, like that makes sense. But this is just such a great case where we've got fear. Again, it's that primal stuff where we don't have experience with children. And we're in this for the long range. We're not in this for like, oh, I've got to make sure by 1.5 they're doing their proper physical, like it's crazy. So I appreciate that you even raising that, Pat, about her not, quote, speaking, on time or whatnot.
Yeah, and I honestly feel kind of, looking back, it is foolish, right? It's every child is different, every situation is different, and they just need the right environment to develop.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add anything on this?
I agree with it all.
Nice, Tony. Is there anything that comes to you with Montessori as such, where it's like, I mean, are they really going to learn enough, or is this maybe too community based? Anything that pops out that's a fear or concern or anything?
I have one. Montessori, it started so long ago, you know, and the world has changed so much, and we're so technology based and information based and STEM and computer science and now AI and just the way the world is going. So is Montessori keeping up with the way the world is changing around us, and is the method going to kind of deviate from where we go as a human race, you know? Because it's like,
Yeah.
I guess I could just question if I want my child to follow a quantitative STEM background, how do I transition from Montessori to that? And is there a transition? Because there doesn't seem to be a lot of focus on numbers or
Yeah.
binary things or those sorts of technical sciences. So
Yeah.
that
No,
that's kind of I guess a pseudo concern. I guess that's the only one that I would really raise.
yeah, and this comes up, and I think it's a great question. Just as anecdotally, let me just put two things out there real quick. So I don't know if you guys are all familiar, no, but so Jeff Bezos was a Montessori child. A lot of and he's building Montessori schools. So this is a guy that obviously in the internet age, like he's this is as big as you get. And then both
Jeff
Google
who?
founders, yeah, yeah, right. You guys know that guy? He's transitioned to some other things. He's out partying now, but um, both Google founders are also Montessori children. And I'm raising them not to be like, oh, look at these guys, but literally Bezos is building Montessori schools. So he thinks it had an impact. And then the Google founders say it had an impact on who they are today. And these are as tech, basically as tech as you get, or relatively tech guys, as you can imagine. But it's anecdotal no matter what. The AI type stuff and the future. One interesting thing about Maria Montessori herself, this woman was so ahead of her time. She was always trying to look at things scientifically. If you read her old books, the amount of observation she did, she looked at children like we should be looking at like a scientist. It's almost off-putting to some parents because it's too kind of methodical. Like she's really studying children. And of course, independence was about as up there as you get. But the first thing was adaptability. How are we going to aid children to adapt to their environment and then adapt the environment to what we want, you know, as human beings? So I think if you're really going with Maria Montessori, you're going to start looking into this and say, okay, so when can we start integrating some of this stuff? When is it age appropriate developmentally? And I would say to your concern, Pat, if I'm just being direct, as children get older, I don't think a lot of people in Montessori have really done the work that's necessary to integrate what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
now with 3 to 6 and you're younger, man, there's so much in the world to get to know that's just out there in the world that you can pick up a lot of tech stuff as you get going. If you miss out on the real world stuff early on, you're in a real detriment. But somebody needs to be jumping into that range. I'm talking 6+ and definitely 9+ and integrating some of what's been learned in tech. And I don't want to say future proofing because we can't future proof, but getting them ready for at least where we're at today. So I think it's a concern as the kids are older, I would say.
Right. And it's a struggle because like my house is full of devices and tablets and you know, and I feel like if I shield her from that, she's not going to be advanced in those technologies. And you know, I know there's limitations and we do limit and we should limit, but I don't want to just not expose her to those things and to just stick strictly to, you know, old school Montessori methods, you know.
Yeah, and that's what I would say is I think Montessori is something that, again, it's about adapting to the world around you and then adapting the world to us. And anyone who kind of goes, you know, anti-tech as such, I mean, they've got a problem, and that is not really Montessori in my view.
No, yeah. And
So
what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that Montessori will always apply because of its flexibility.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, that's an approach.
It'll always be relevant.
And it's a as Trishul was raising, a lot of this is about observing children. I think there's an episode on fantasy that I did, but Montessori does say some things about the youngest ages that you want to start with reality first. So if you put a child in front of a screen and they're looking at fantastic creatures jumping out at them, witches and you know, fairies and everything, it could be confusing. Why not just put them outside with like some real animals and real plants? So that's kind of, that is a fundamental Montessori view, but that's a little bit of a tangent. So anybody else have some major or minor concerns about Montessori?
I think it aligns with the notion that Pat was putting forward, where it it's a little trite to say this, but it feels like things are different now.
Yeah.
It
Sound like
just
an
feels
old
that
man.
way. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Very
Yeah.
cliche, but
Yeah.
oh boy, it feels like things are different now.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where things are moving so quickly, and it's hard to say what will be valued in a decade or two from now from an education standpoint.
Yeah.
I know, for example, when I was growing up, we had I had an engineering background, so a lot of math and STEM stuff. And a large part of it was you just got to learn this stuff, which seems boring, but you got to do it, to go to
Mm,
the next level. And it wasn't creative, or it wasn't personally driven, because I had a strong interest in learning those specific things. I had a strong interest in the end goal. And that's what kept me going through those check boxes. And the tricky thing now is, even if you go through all those check boxes, will that career that you had an ambition for, as a freshman at university, even exist when you graduate? And how do you deal with that? You just spent your previous, 18 years doing some stuff, spent 4 years of university learning all of these things, so you have a specialized degree in this field, and you graduate, and whoops, no, that field doesn't exist
yeah.
anymore. So
Yeah. And I think that's what you're raising is great and connected with that. Think about even like, because I heard this when I must have been like 15 years ago. It's like, oh, we got to teach the kids to code because then they're going to, if they don't know how to code, then they're
Mhm.
not going to get any jobs. And it's like today, how much time are you going to spend on coding given the computer is going to be doing? So it's like we cannot literally future proof children. The only way I think we can do this is the independence. And this is Montessori's view. And then aiding them in that when they're gaining that independence, they're gaining self confidence. So when you have a strong sense of self, man, like any of us here, we all have jobs that we're really stoked on. But what happens if tomorrow, like that job's gone? We're going to have to adapt, and we got to have the confidence to say, oh, we can do it. And I think that's at a core level, that's what Montessori is offering. It's not saying, hey, we're going to give your kid every single skill that's possible 20 years from now that they're going to need. It's the core skills and the core confidence that, oh, you can handle this. You can handle this.
yeah.
Mm.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add, if I had to
Oh,
break it down, it would be the notion of not really trying to teach knowledge and facts, but really just teaching a child how to learn for themselves, right? Teaching um, a fisherman how to fish, right? Instead of, I messed that up. Instead of giving them
no,
fish.
but I think that's huge because I think today in the culture, it's very popular to kind of everybody wants this is like everybody wants to save the world, right? But if you can't do basic stuff in life on your own, like, and this is a problem. Interestingly enough, it's happening with richer families because they're giving their kids everything. They're having a nanny do everything, and they're stifling their own kids. So here, the idea is to go back to the basics. Like, and you guys know with your kids, they love to do what we do as adults. So help them to do the basic stuff, and then you build on it. Um, but I do like it's funny. But we're talking about stuff that's kind of confidence, independence, but it comes through learning real stuff. Like we're just talking about geography. Like these kids are learning all the countries in different world. Trishul, like in terms of reading, Rheya's like just going nuts with reading. There's a lot of content here too. So it's just a good mixture of things in my view. But I think it's a real concern as the kids get older with the idea of like, are they learning about tech? Are they learning about the world of tech today? Um, so
What you're saying, Jesse, is actually resonating with me in the opposite direction because as a millennial who graduated during the financial crisis as a finance major and then couldn't find work, went into sports and then telco, and then now find myself in IT. My major in education did not really matter. What I needed was life skills to navigate tough job markets and networking and the world around me of
yeah,
adulthood. And what you're talking about with Montessori education really feeds into that, and that's maybe a skill set I lacked as a child because I didn't go through Montessori. I wasn't prepared for that, and it took me longer than expected to get on my feet through that period. So I think there's something to that.
Can't really sum it up better than that, right? Like we've all had different conversations about AI and technology at different points in times, and it's just how are kids going to adapt to this?
Yeah.
What is this new world? How's this going to change education? How's this going to change jobs? No one has the answer. Just how can we best set them up for success?
Yeah, and I got to tell you guys, being in Montessori and being because I lived in San Francisco for I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months, and I know a lot of tech people, so high level tech people, and a lot of very smart tech people because they're smart in tech. They think, well, I know everything, so I'm going to start teaching children, and they've created teaching programs. And then where are those? Because tech is their field and the tech is the future. Children are online playing games. They're motivated by game theory. They cannot do anything when they get off the computer. Some of these kids are just a mess, but they have top of the line computers, iPads, all the tech stuff you'd want. But they never got the skills of like, well, what happens when I have a physical conflict with a friend in the class? When I run into him, what do I do? What there's just can they even take care of themselves? Like, the Kennedy and the plant. And Tony, I've got a video for you today. Oh my gosh, it's Amaya taking care of a plant. It's like almost 15 minutes long. It's so awesome. But the idea that we can take care of our environment, we can help a friend out, whereas everything's online and everything else is taken care of for. Oh, don't worry about that. The nanny's got it, or the cleaner's taking care of that. It's like, dude, if you haven't gotten those basic skills, you're not going to feel confident that you can do things in the world. So anyways, sum that up. Tech is important, but that we don't know what's going to happen long range when our kids are 20, 30 years old. So, all right. I know I got you guys over for a little bit. Any jumping off things that you want to throw out there to the world? Tony's like, no, I got kids to take care of. I gotta get out of here.
I think
Alyssa
what are you
about to
looking
knock on the door.
I-
Get out here. Dinner's ready, Tony. What are you doing? Get off your friend's podcast. What do you think this is? Time for games?
I was going to throw out just an anecdote on there, just kind of giving me some assurance that I've had plenty of insurance, but just one extra note of assurance that things are going in the right direction. I remember I was preparing dinner one evening, and Rhea, I asked her if she wanted to help me. She's like, "No, I want to go play and do something else." And then she comes to me while I'm cooking, and she says, can you make me a paper airplane like how I made her last week? And I said, well, I'm a bit busy now. You can help me and maybe we can do it later. And she said, well, maybe I'll try it on my own. And, she tried and struggled with it. And then eventually she was like, this isn't working. So then she's like, what can I do? I'm like, well, you can ask Google or you can look around. And she ended up going on YouTube and searching for airplane videos and instructions on how to make airplanes. And the first video she tried, it just didn't work out. It was too complicated, but she tried a few others. And then, by the time the meal is ready, I just see airplanes like getting thrown across the room. So it's I mean,
awesome.
Airplanes.
That
It
is
doesn't.
awesome.
It's not like a real life skill, but what she portrayed to me is if she has an interest in something, she can now go off and figure it out on
That's
her
awesome.
own. Yeah, and use her own intuition to figure out how to accomplish it.
Yep. That's awesome.
I think Montessori in general has just developed, I guess, complexity in Kennedy's cognitive ability. It's like things she talks about are at different levels than what I expect her to. She's like, Daddy, what is that? And I go, that's a stop sign. And she goes, no, that's a red octagon. And I'm like, that is the right answer. That is the right answer. And
You're not wrong.
right. And it's like it's a whole different level. Like she's 3, that's a stop sign.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's a red octagon. So I have to constantly feel like I need to push her and tell her the truth and explain it all because she gets it. She understands different levels of things, and that I think she's developed that from Montessori, and just making connections, constant connections to things in different ways. And I'm so impressed by it every single day.
Man, that's wonderful. Yeah, I just the idea that you're saying, like, we have certain expectations of what a quote 2-year-old or 3-year-old or whatever should be capable of, and it's just I've been doing this 20 years, and I'm just it's amazing. So we just can't
Mhm.
these restrictions or these limits that we put on them, we can't do it.
No, I mean we tell ourselves that we are limitless. Like the what humans have done in space, and the monuments we've built, and all the crazy things we've done in science. Why would we limit our children? Why would we
Yeah,
put boundaries on any of that? So yeah,
yeah,
let them explore, let them create their own boundaries, just be there as the guardrails to keep them safe.
yeah.